Hello everybody. So I just wanted to create a video to talk about memory errors and memory gaps. And so just to give you a heads up, I'm going to break this because I have a feeling it's going to get pretty lengthy. I want to break this down into some different subsections. And so there'll be individual parts of this. But let's go ahead and get started with the first part. So the first thing I want to talk about is the idea of memory errors. And basically memory errors are any time that we have a memory for something, but there's something not accurate about it. There's some sort of error in our memory of what actually happened. And a lot of times when that happens, it's actually knowledge that we have about the event sneaks into our memory, usually through the process of reconsolidation, where these memories are in working memory, and we add the new knowledge that we know about an event, and it somehow gets connected through the process of reconsolidation into our later memory for that event, or our long-term memory for that event. And so let me give you a few examples just to highlight how this could happen. So I don't know how many people know about or will remember Princess Diana, but she was married to Prince Charles, and she was very famous. Was kind of the world's sweetheart. She did a lot of things to help people. I'm doing a horrible description of her, but she was an international celebrity, and what ended up happening is because of her international celebrity, there was a lot of paparazzi that would follow her all the time, and in the process of this, she there was a car wreck, and she died in the car wreck. And one of the things is that when you talk to at least some people or researchers went in and talked to people and asked them what they remembered about Princess Diana's death, one of the things that happened is that people were really confident that they actually saw the video footage of the crash happen. And that's actually impossible. What ended up happening is that she went into a tunnel, and in that tunnel, that's where the car accident happened. And so there's absolutely no video of the crash whatsoever. It just doesn't exist. But what ended up happening is that after her death, the news would report on it, and it would show different scenes of the tunnel and, what the car looked like in the tunnel. And so people added that to their memory of Princess Diana's passing and would report it as though they had actually seen it, even though it wasn't until later that they saw images of both the tunnel and the crash and everything like that. And so this is what I'm saying, where during reconsolidation, a lot of times, as this information is pulled into working memory, as people are watching updated news footage about the event, that they're actually going to add details in that they're learning during the newscast or the follow-up news to the event, and that's going to become part of their memory for it. Now, an experimental way that this has been looked at, and there have been numerous different studies that have gone in and looked at this, but I want to talk a little bit and focus on something called the waiting room experiments. And so in the waiting room experiments, what happened is that people would come in for a research study, and as participants, they were asked to or they were told, hey, we need a few minutes to finish setting up the experiment. If you can just go ahead and sit in this room, hang out for a little bit, we'll come and get you in a minute whenever we're done getting our experiment set up and bring you into the experiment. And so what would end up happening is they'd sit in this waiting room for a brief period of time, and then the experimenter would have them come into the room and say, okay, let's go ahead and get started with the experiment. What I want you to do is I want you to recall as many things as you can remember from the waiting room that you were just sitting in. And so a lot of times what they were told, or at least one of the conditions that was done, is they were told that they were sitting in a professor's office. And what's interesting is that whenever they were told they were sitting in a professor's office, they would include stereotypical things that you would expect to be in a professor's office. So you might expect things like books, a computer, coffee maker, bulletin boards, whiteboards, a desk, those types of things that you would traditionally find in a professor's office. Now, if you were to change the waiting room and say it was something else, what participants would tend to do is that they would tend to report there being stereotypical things that would be consistent with whatever room they were in. And so one of the things that this points out is that we take our knowledge about events, and a lot of times we'll recall or remember things that should belong there. Now, what's interesting is if you were to come into my office on campus, I have a lot of traditional things that you might see in one's office, but also because I have a love of cats, people always gift me with cat things, and so one of the things I have is a giant kitten head pillow in my office. And so let's say if somebody were to sit in my office, chances are good they're not going to say, oh, I saw a kitten head pillow, even though it's, stands out. It's pretty shocking. they're not going to report that because it's not stereotypical. And so one of the key things, especially whenever we're making memory errors, is that knowledge, and especially knowledge about either the scene or the event, or knowledge that we've gained afterwards, is going to play a big role in not only us updating our memory, but also leading to some memory errors. Now, another type of memory I want to talk about is something that's called flashbulb memory. And the reason it gets its name is because back in the olden days, when they would take photographs, if you ever think of like a 1930s movie, there would be what's called a flash bulb. And instead of just having a flash, there would be a little gunpowder. I forget exactly what the material is, but you would light it and it would let off a big flash. And what would happen is, if you've ever, even this happens today with modern flashes, whenever you have that, everything that's there at the moment that the flash goes off is burnt into your eyes for a little bit. And so we've talked about that as something similar to sensory memory. But that's what happens with flashbulb memories. So usually in the case of flashbulb memories, something extremely tragic has happened. And so we're going to talk about flashbulb memories on the national level, but this could also happen worldwide. If there's some shocking event that affects the entire world, there could be flashbulb memories for that. And so I might ramble about the pandemic a little bit, but we're going to talk about national phenomenon that have affected, but there could also be local and regional flashbulb memories too, especially when something shocking happened. Now, what these type of flashbulb memories are is that they're very highly detailed, and people report them as exceptionally vivid snapshots of the moment and circumstances in which they heard some sort of surprising news or witnessed an event. And so I have some pictorial examples here that you may have heard. Either parents, grandparents, great-grandparents would talk that they could remember exactly what it was they were doing whenever they learned that JFK was assassinated. Or similarly, you or somebody close to you may report, "Oh, I remember exactly what it was doing, or what I was doing, and what I was wearing, and everything that was going on whenever the Twin Towers were a plane." Crashed into the planes crashed into the Twin Towers. Or another big one that typically comes up with flashbulb memories is the Challenger incident, where there was a teacher on board a NASA flight that went up. There were a lot of school kids that were watching this launch because the teacher was involved in the space flight, and what ended up happening is that the rocket exploded not that far from Earth, and it was basically broadcast on national TV to a bunch of different classrooms, so a lot of people were involved in this. And the key thing here is that when people report flashbulb memories, it's like they remember everything to a T of what they were doing, saying, and hearing at the moment that they learned about this particular event. So I'm sure you've heard family members talk about this, and they especially talk about it with just such vividness. They remember exactly what it is they're doing. And those are great examples of flashbulb memories. Now, one of the things that I should say about this, and we'll digress a little bit from the main point, is that when it comes to flashbulb memories, they typically tend to be national events. And this makes sense because those are usually the things that are so drastic and shocking that it's rare for events like that to happen on such an international level. Although with the pandemic, it'll be kind of interesting in that usually when I would present this, up until the pandemic, there were issues where I couldn't really think of too many flashbulb memories that people might have had that are typical 18 years of age or so college students, because the September 11th at this point is almost, is almost 20 years old. So these are seemingly rare, but it'll be interesting to see what ends up happening with the pandemic if this becomes, in which case it would become a international phenomenon of if people remember exactly what they were saying, doing, and wearing when they first heard that we are going to go into lockdown. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. That's a potential thing that could come up with flashbulb memories, although very different. Again, most of the ones that we talk about, and all my examples here are all at the national level, but it's an interesting thing to think about. As we talk about flashbulb memories, and as you think about how these may be involved in your life as time and history moves forward. Now, when it comes to to the Challenger explosion, which is the one I'm going to focus on here. Here what I have is I have two different reports of what people were doing when they learned of the Challenger explosion, and this is their report of what was going on. So I'll read the first one. I was in a religion class and some people walked in and started talking about it. I didn't know any details except that it had exploded and the school teacher students had all been watching, which I thought was so sad. Then after class, I went to my room and I watched the TV program talking about it and I got all the details from that. So here you can get a sense of the vividness, right? They remember exactly what it was that they were doing. They can remember the order of events, and here they don't go into too much detail, but in some events, people may even report what it was they were wearing and whatnot. So in this next one, when I first heard about the explosion, I was sitting in my freshman dorm room with my roommate, and we were watching TV. It came on a news flash, and we were both totally shocked. I was really upset, and I went upstairs to talk to a friend of mine, and then I called my parents. Now, I give these two reports, and I set them up as being two separate reports. But one of the things that really highlights the interesting thing about flashbulb memories is for these vivid descriptions, people tend to be very, very incorrect about the memories that they have. And so this actually comes from a study that was done by Neiser and Harsh in 1992. And they basically had people come in and talk about their experiences with the Challenger explosion. Now, the description that's on the left-hand side was taken the day after the Challenger incident. So the day after the Challenger exploded, they had people come in the lab and explain to them what it was they were doing. They then followed up with them in 2.5 years and asked them to report what it was that they were doing whenever they heard about the Challenger incident. And so these two descriptions actually come from the exact same person, just that they come 2.5 years apart from each other. So what you'll see here is that even though they're very vivid, there are big differences between the two different descriptions. And so this is what happens a lot with flashbulb memories. Even though people believe that they know exactly what they're doing, that it's a vivid memory for them, oftentimes that memory isn't correct and would be very different if they had written in a journal on the day after it happened versus at a later date. So even though they're vivid, flashbulb memories tend to be pretty bad. Now, part of the reason why they tend to be bad, we've already talked about. And really what ends up happening is that after there's some sort of a traumatic event, such as JFK assassination or September 11th or the Challenger incident, there's days and days and days, even for years, of follow-up on that particular story. And so what ends up happening is that people that are following that follow-up tend to incorporate that later information, those later details, and their own later experiences into their memory. And so when we hear these, one of the reasons why tragedies are where people tend to have flashbulb memories is because we hear about those a lot. If they're just a small little event like a flood or something like that, chances are good that we'll hear about it for maybe a week and then never hear about it again. However, in the case of tragedies, we'll constantly be getting frequent reports and updates about what's being learned, and from that gets incorporated into our memory of the event and is actually what we recall whenever we recall the flashbulb memory years and years later. The other thing that happens, and you may have this from your own experiences, is sometimes we fill in gaps in our memory. And so I know there have been times where these haven't been flashbulb memories, but I'm trying to remember something that happened with a friend, and there are these gaps. And so one of the things is I'm like, well, hold on. If this person was here and this happened, then that means that something else had already happened in order for that other person to be there. And so you start filling in information and using that information to fill the gaps in our memory. As I was thinking about talking about the pandemic in this particular video, I was actually thinking about what happened on the day that I learned that we would be closing down school for a period of time, and what happened in that day. And the same exact thing here, where I was trying to fill in gaps because I know that I had heard that there was a possibility that the Michigan State and the Ann Arbor campus, I believe. So actually, maybe I'm filling this in. There was another institution. So actually, here you go. Here's a perfect example of this. So I know that I had heard about Michigan State closing their campus, and there was another institution. I'm assuming that it was in the Ann Arbor campus, but it might have actually been another institution. Um, and so we start filling in those gaps in our information and just take it as fact that those are facts about the memory. And so that's another way that why flashbulb memories can be so bad. So that wraps up what I want to talk about at least some basic memory errors. So in this next section, we're actually going to shift gears kind of, where we're still going to be talking about memory errors, but we're going to be talking about memory errors and specifically from the perspective of the legal world and eyewitness testimony and policing and the legal system. And so I feel like this is a good stopping spot before we move into something that is related but slightly different. And so, per usual, if you have any questions, definitely reach out. I'm happy to answer them.